This is our Greek civilization by me, Payton first.
KeShaun.
And Max Evans. This is our table of contents to just show you the layout of how things will be said and presented. And one of the most important things in the Greek culture was writing, so here's one.
So, like she said, it was one of the most important things in civilization. And the thing is that the Greeks were the first Europeans to come up with an alphabet and a system of writing, which spread throughout Europe, and now is one of the ancestors of most writing in Europe. And also, this started with the adoption of the Phoenician language, which is now still used today. And as we were talking about yesterday, that the Greek civilization impacted the whole world, we got many of our words from it, and one of them is the word alphabet, which comes from the first two letters of the Greek alphabet, alpha and beta. We have an interactive activity that we'd like to do, and we passed out sheets of paper. We would like you guys to write the word Socrates, which is one of the most famous philosophers in Greece, and write it in those letters. They go from A to Z. We will have a prize for the person that did it first.
Yeah, they have all Yours was correct.
I am going to try right now.
What's the word?
It's a P.
That's the real way how to spell it, guys.
These are track.
And someone did actually get it right.
So,
So, surprise.
don't sit your mind Don't
Really?
Your prize is good job, you.
And like I said, Socrates was one of the most famous philosophers in Greece, and he actually invented a solid conversation, which was called the Socratic method. Next up is symbols. Symbols is very important. It represented things, it meant things, and they use it in writing also. The two most common ones that we know throughout the world is alpha and omega, which is the first letter and the last letter. And that is also used with name, beginning, and end. And then we have the labyrinth, which is an axe symbol, and it represents either combat or ceremony. This was very interesting that when getting an education back then in ancient Greece, it depended mostly on your social class. If you were poor or if you were rich, and the high social classes would actually get teachers that were paid and tutors and would go to certain schools, and then the lower class, they would get teachers that weren't paid, and they would have to do it out maybe in the countryside or maybe somewhere else far away from where the upper class got education. Homer was one of the most famous ancient Greek poets, and he wrote a poem that's called Odyssey. And this will explain a little bit about that story, which was about a young king who traveled to Troy to battle in the Trojan War, and this will explain a little bit more.
The Odyssey is about Odysseus' journey home after the Trojan War. Odysseus is a Greek. He's the king of Ithaca, and before the start of the poem, he and the other Greeks laid siege to the city of Troy, located in what's now northwestern Turkey. The war lasted for 10 years. After the Greeks defeated the Trojans, Odysseus and his men got back in their ships and started their trip home to Ithaca, a rocky little island off the Greek mainland, where Odysseus' wife and son are waiting for him. Along the way, they run into several dangerous obstacles, and all of Odysseus' men die. Odysseus survives because of his intelligence and cunning, the qualities he's renowned for, and he eventually makes it home, but the journey takes him 10 years. The story breaks roughly into 3 parts. The first part doesn't really even involve Odysseus. It's more about what's going on in Ithaca with his wife and son while he's gone. In the second part, we learn what happened to Odysseus in the 8 years since he left Troy. And in the final part, we finally see Odysseus return home. The poem opens with 2 gods.
So that was kind of a summary about what happened. Climate is another important thing, and I will give that to Matt.
Okay, so the climate in ancient Greece was Mediterranean, and that meant that there was snowy winters and hot summers, and up in the northern regions there would always be a heavy snowfall in the winter, and in the southern regions, while it was winter, there'd be a lot lighter snow and hardly any, but it'd still be cold. And in the winter there was no crops because it was hard to grow crops there, and in the summers it was easy because self-explanatory, there's no like cold stopping it, and the heat made it easier for the crops to grow. So the climate made it hard sometimes for them to grow crops, and summers made it easy, and that kind of benefited them and also didn't benefit them. Next is geography. There were mountains in Greece that surrounded Athens, and that acted as a military defense because they were really tall and there was a whole bunch of them together. So it'd make it hard for the enemy military to come across. Then there's a picture of some of the mountains that made it hard for them to cross. And it impacted them because it made a defense for them, and they didn't have to use as much troops or use a lot of workers to build a huge gate or wall around the area. And there were some waterways that surrounded Greece, and that made trade very easy because all they had to use was boats, and they didn't have to walk and encounter any animals or any bandits that are trying to stop them. And next is Wilson with religion.
Now, with the show of hands, I would like to know how many people have heard about the ancient Greek gods or have seen movies about them, including Percy Jackson or Immortal. Yeah, so it's very common, it's very known, right? This video will show some of the Olympians, which would be the 12 Olympians, the 12 most important gods, and I'll leave that to the video to show you. the big three is what they're called, the three most powerful gods, which were the sons of the first gods, the Titans, which Zeus overthrew his father. And Zeus was the king of the heavens and the king of the gods, he was the most important. And Poseidon was his brother, the king of the sea, and he controlled everything, which included horses and dolphins that you saw in the video. And Hades was the king of the underworld and the dead. One fun fact that I found out to be interesting was that Hades wasn't fully accepted into the Olympians, which lived in Olympus, at the top of Mount Olympus, which is the highest peak in Greece. And he wasn't fully accepted because he was a suburban god, because he lived underground. And this is Hades this is a clip from the movie Percy Jackson.
You're Hades?
Yes.
I didn't expect you to look like this, man.
Would you prefer that I looked like this?
When the Titans were defeated and the gods took over the world, Zeus and Poseidon's brother, Hades, was made lord of the underworld. His responsibilities include guarding the pit of Tartarus, where the Titans are imprisoned, and overseeing the souls of the dead. He has many servants, including the 3 hellhounds, and the ferryman who transports the dead across the river Styx.
That was Hades. And as you can see, ancient Greeks' religion was a polytheistic religion, which means they believed in many gods and goddesses. And this mostly started growing in the Bronze Age, which was during the 3000 to 1000 BC area. The Greeks worshipped in sanctuaries that they made depending on where the god was and what type of region he ruled. And this would depend on where he was. They would either do it in the city or the countryside. One fun thing is that even though the gods were almighty and powerful, they couldn't control the fate of people. And one example is the video that I showed you, which was Odysseus. And the gods couldn't stop them, but they made his traveling harder. Greece has many festivals to worship the gods, and one important festival that still goes on today was the Olympic Games, and they worship Zeus for that. They believe that if they worshiped the gods and gave them what they needed or what they wanted, they would have no problems and their crops would grow. But if they didn't, the gods would punish them by sending them diseases or bad things that happen to their civilization. Hellenism is one religion that still goes on today. It's a modern version of ancient Greece's religion. It's mainly focused around the 12 Olympians, the video that I showed you guys, and there's still more guys, there's 12 of them. And it's mostly focused around them, and that's the more modern version of what it was. Another important style that happened back then in ancient Greece is government in KeShaun.
Government, it's like they have the same government we have. They actually got it from us. Now it's spelled a little differently, but I don't see what really changed besides what year they were in and what year we're in. They had people like us from the city states. They had 40,000 people. 40,000 people attended these meetings. They had meetings like 40 a year. And they voted on certain things, and just like Congress do, or the president does, yeah. One of the most famous leaders, he was Alexander the Great. Now, he was in power of Greece at one point, but he wasn't really, in my opinion, the best leader. He was one of the best conquerors to ever, I think, touched the face of this earth, because he conquered mainly all of Europe and all the way to India before he was 32, because he died when he was 32. And here's a video.
Alexander III of Macedon. His legend gives him the name Alexander the Great, but he could also be known as Alexander the Annihilator.
Anyone that gets in his way will be crushed. He will annihilate them.
Alexander considered himself.
So that's a little bit about Alexander the Great. They called him the Annihilator. Laws that they had to abide by was Croatian laws. They had to follow the Croatian laws. So it was written by Pluto. No, not the planet Pluto. Pluto. It was a person in Greek civilization. Their military conquest, as I said, Alexander the Great was one of the best conquerors. So he led the military. If you go over to Europe or something, you touch that land, he conquered it. He conquered it all. He was the best. And I'll go to economy, which is Payton.
Economy is another one of the very important things that have to do with Greek, just like today. They had a lot of olive trees and olives were a lot of their main things. And they had cattle, and then they moved to a more sustainable territory where they moved to goat and sheep, which then after they had gotten them, a lot of other people started following them, and goat and sheep became very popular. Their currency, they didn't have a currency before 600 BC, so they created their own. And other states started to follow them, and so every single state had their own coin. So when visitors would come, they would have to find a money changer, and when they did, it would cost them a 5 to 6% tax just to change their normal coins to that state's coin. Market and trade was very important to them. They had food and raw materials, and the import of wine and pottery helped increase the Greek culture, and also olives had helped with that. The social pyramid was kind of complex to me, but the men were the most important there. They would go out, do all the jobs and everything, while the women and young girls stayed at home cooking and cleaning, while the boys went to school and got their education. Culture is another very important thing because it's what makes Greek culture known. And so their artistic expression was made out of mainly marble and bronze. And at first everything was made out of bronze or marble, and then once bronze came along, they started calling everything marble copies because bronze was a lot more easier to get than marble was. They were the first Europeans to learn to write with an alphabet. They would write it left to right, and as time grew on, they would alternate lines. Like they would move left to right, and then the next line they'd move right to left, just so that it would be more different. And they were used to assign as symbols for names or as a sign of numbers too. So it wasn't just alphabet, it was also numbers. Greek was the people to create the Olympics. They would have their own Olympic Games, and they would take it very seriously because of the activity. They believed that the gods liked strong men, and the kids, or boys should I say, had their own, but the girls were not allowed to watch because they would normally play it naked. They didn't take fashion very seriously. They would just basically drape a type of sheet over them so that they could style it many different ways, and they preferred less cloth or less amount of sheet in the summer because it got so hot, and then more in the winter. Greeks had 3 meals a day, the largest one being lunch. They didn't really eat a lot of breakfast, so they would have snacks around 11-ish. And dinner was fruit and fish, basically. And because meat was not, it was very expensive, so their main source of basically protein was fish. And timeline with KeShaun.
The timeline is, what is this one? Timeline, just a brief, like, sketch of the timeline. No. Like some leaders there, Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great, where Rome was founded. And then I have a short clip of a documentary. Do I have to show the documentary?
You can just talk about what you're gonna do with it.
Okay. Documentary is just gonna be about ancient Greece and interviews. And
Thank you, and we hope you enjoyed our presentation.